session. Um, Yeah. So this workshop is also in the same context. Having recently published my first book with Cambridge, I mean, also even before the publishing started, there's lots of questions which I was going through, lots of challenges which first-time authors face. So we thought that it'll be very useful for large section of academics to have a interaction interface with Cambridge University Press, so that they also understand how to go about it. There are some commonly existing issues we face, which often we don't know who to ask. So we are hoping that this will be an avenue for that. Anwesha Rana was my editor for my book as well, which has come out recently, and she's very generously agreed to, present, her perspective as an editor with Cambridge. I'll just introduce Anwesha Rana, the resource person for today. She's a senior commissioning editor with Cambridge University Press, and her focus areas have been politics, sociology, history, law, and economics and management. And she commissions both, textbooks as well as monographs. And she's been her focus area is also South Asia. And she's looking at South Asian within the series of South Asian social sciences and global South Asians, among other things. As I said, she was the editor for my book as well. So, I mean, over to you, Anwesha. Thank you so much for doing this for us. And also, we have about 57 participants today. And as I had mentioned to you in the email itself, we've got a humongous amount of response for the call for this workshop, almost 4 times what we expected. So we had to reduce the number, and we have prioritized again in line with what Khidki's goals are. We've prioritized scholars who are working in public universities, who are working in the global south, versus those who are already entrenched in academic networks of west and global north, etc. And those who are also those who are more precariously employed versus those who are having much more well-endowed positions. So that's been the way of filtering for this workshop. Over to you, Anwesha. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yamini. Thank you, Swati, all of you for joining us here. And that is a very thoughtful way of filtering out or giving first priority to participants. So I'll share my slides, and please put in your questions in the chat however you would like to, or you could wait. Okay, it says sharing is not turned on yet. So you could wait and ask at the end of the session, or you could just keep, compiling your questions. I know that academic from the list, I could see that a lot of you have used words like, how do I understand it more transparently, or what is it that. So I understand that there is a lot of this sort of confusion, or not exactly confusion, but there is a lot of fog around what publishing is and what is it. Seems to be a lot of intimidation somewhere that it's too big and how do we go about it. Yamini, could you confirm that the screen is visible? Is it?
Yes, it's visible. It's visible, and you're audible as well. You could do a full screen. Yes,
Okay.
yes, it's
So
visible.
just to clear the fog around this. I mean, of course, academic writing and publishing are both important. It's important for us as publishers, definitely, but also for you as scholars. It's we know how the world works. There is tenure. There is a lot of considerations. There is a point-based system for publishing in journals. Books somehow don't seem to count as much in a lot of private university settings. Given all of that, it is still, I think it goes back to the basics of writing for the sake of writing, for the sake of sharing knowledge as well. And it is really sad that there seems to be so much, gatekeeping around these processes, or it's not that you need to be introduced to somebody through somebody else. You should just be able to find an editor, write to them, have a conversation. Ideally, in a very ideal world, that is what should happen. So our aim by talking to you today here is to break down these systems a little bit and also make it more approachable. In any case, after the session, I hope that all of you will know at least one editor in a press whom you can approach. You can write to us regardless of whether eventually the book happens with us or not, there should be a space where you can ask questions or seek more clarity. So some of the things besides going into what the publishing process is like, how what is it, some basics that you need to do to develop your thesis into a monograph. These are some of the most frequently asked questions from my experience that I have listed here. I hope it reflects or resonates with some of you. And of course, we can keep adding to this. And I'm hoping that these will be answered through the session and in a Q&A with you after that as well. So we'll begin with the basics of writing. The ABC of anything, as you know, is important. So accuracy, brevity, and clarity. Again, I'll come back to the point about India at large and how we are taught to write, how we are taught to speak, how do we conduct ourselves through our writing. To me, it has always felt very bureaucratic in a way that we are all taught the same kind of English writing. It's very jargon heavy. It's very, genuflecting to authority almost. But writing
And
doesn't
Risha,
have
your
to.
voice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay. Go
Is
ahead.
it
Sorry.
fine? So writing doesn't have to be like that. And
There was a
increasingly,
break.
sorry,
Yeah.
is this okay now? And is this fine, Yamini?
Yeah. I think yes,
Okay,
fine.
okay,
Sorry.
okay.
Yes.
So writing shouldn't have to be that intimidating. It shouldn't have to, you shouldn't have to follow a very jargon heavy, very difficult sort of writing or language that is traditionally imbibed in us. Those of us who have done their schooling in India, I think, will be very familiar with this. But increasingly, academic writing is also becoming more and more accessible. And I do think that publishers have a huge role to play in that, because it should be the responsibility of editors and publishers to encourage people to write more easily, which is not, obviously, it doesn't equate itself with not writing or not presenting scholarly work. It should be serious work. It should be deeply researched, very sure of itself, very well cited, very robust in its presentation. But at the same time, it doesn't need to depend on very difficult language or long winded sentences, presenting it in a very complicated way. That should really not be the priority, and that should not weigh down on any author. Also, obviously, another problem is that not all researchers are automatically writers. Some of us, of course, can be better writers than some others, or writing may come naturally. Some of us often struggle with the way I write. I know that after writing one email, I overthink it a lot, that could I have written it differently. But often we don't have the luxury of time where I can go back and revise the tone of a certain email. But with academic publishing, one benefit or a drawback is that it is a long process. It takes a lot of time. So you will have, I hope, the scope to revise your writing, reflect on it, present it in the most accurate and clear way that you can. So do always keep in mind that it should be accurate. What you are saying should be very correct. It should not lend itself to ambiguity in any way. It should be precise and clear. So think of the kind of writing that you have benefited from, and what is the way that you can come closest to that sort of writing, so that you think anybody else will benefit from the work that you will eventually be publishing. And this applies to both journal writing or long form essays or books. I'll take a couple of minutes to reflect on this as well, how to decide on a publisher, because this is again something that comes up quite frequently in our conversations with authors, is that which publisher is it that they should go to. So the most relevant one should be the priority. However, there are a number of other things that one may want to prioritize. You may have seen there is a lot of history writing happening now, and a lot of that is from public intellectuals being published by publishers like Penguin, HarperCollins, Hachette, Bloomsbury, and so on. So, what does the role of a publisher like Cambridge or Oxford, where do we stand then? I think a difference there would be, what is the audience that you want to reach. And there is a lot of conversation, debates even on, do public intellectuals really count as historians? So and where are the actually trained historians, where do they sit at the interface of all of this? So there are these all sorts of considerations, and as an author, you are of course free to decide as to which publisher you want to go with. However, given the academic terrain or how things proceed in academia, what are the expectations, what is going to help you advance your career, we see often that for first time authors, often academic publishers that are traditionally known for academic publishing are a more natural home. And eventually, you may have seen that once somebody establishes themselves as a historian or say a political scientist, they then graduate to publishing or writing more trade oriented or academic non-fiction kind of writing. So all of those considerations are there for you to evaluate, but the most practical ones for first time authors would be that what is it that you really need, what is it that you are trying to say through your work, and what are the motivations because of which you are trying to publish. So, of course, if you think that you have something that you want to say, which doesn't really need to be restricted to an academic audience, and it is something that you think will appeal to a vast general majoritarian audience, that it's going to be an airport book, feel free to proceed to think of somebody like Penguin or any other trade publisher. But if your consideration is that you want to develop your thesis into a monograph, then I think academic publishers would be a more natural home for you. Likewise, do look up what the reputation of the publisher seems to be. Are they a publisher that your peers have heard of? Have they published with them? Do they have digital offerings? Is your book going to be available as hardback, paperback, ebook? What are the different formats? Where is it going to be available? Which market does this particular publisher focus on? What is it that they have been publishing recently? So, do you think that your book is going to be in conversation with the list that they have built up so far? These are all points that you should keep in mind when you are thinking of whom to approach. And also, very importantly, do look up the editorial board itself. Who are the editors at the press? Do any of your peers know them? What has their experience been like? There are likely to be pros and cons. Is there a particular editor that you may have heard of and you would want to work with them, given the kind of you know background you have received about them? If somebody has really enjoyed working with them, if they have had a very fruitful intellectual exchange that you think your book could benefit from. So these would be some things that we would say you should absolutely keep in mind. Moving on to submitting a book proposal. Here, I will go back to a point that was on the first slide from the frequently asked questions, is that when should one approach a publisher? There is really no correct answer, and that will happen at a lot of stages where you will see that there is not just one accurate answer, really. If you think you want to develop a book proposal, you can write to an editor. If you have a proposal, you can write to them. If you think you have a manuscript ready, you can write to them. So basically, the answer is you can write to them whenever you want, and then keep a conversation going. So there have been, and because I said that academic publishing is a long term thing, it's a very it takes a while, and there have been proposals that I have received in 2017, and the manuscript is going into peer review now in 2000 at the end of 2025. So it's important to keep timelines in mind of this kind. I'm not saying that you will take 10 years to develop your book, but it may just happen that there is an idea you have now and that takes a backseat for whichever reason, and you come back to it 3 years from now or 5 years from now. But you should be absolutely free to speak with an editor at least. So if you want to write to CUP tomorrow and ask that would you be interested in this, the press may say that we are not entirely certain we understand what you are trying to do, but if you send us a book proposal, we would like to read that. You could say that yes, I will work on the proposal, and then before you know 3 years have passed, and that happens more often than I can possibly convince you of. So don't hesitate to reach out to any publisher. Even if you don't have a fully drafted proposal ready, just reach out, have a conversation going. If nothing else, they'll be able to give you a book proposal form. You will get some idea of what is it that publishers are expecting, what are the fields under which you should provide information. While you're submitting a book proposal or reaching out to an editor, remember that don't overburden them with a lot of information. So don't send in a full manuscript, because editors in all likelihood will not have the time to read the manuscript right away. Which is why a proposal is important, because it condenses your thoughts and your points, arguments, and presents it in a more precise way to a publisher to understand whether that is going to be relevant to their list or not. You should also disclose a parallel submission, which means that if you have written to several publishers at once and you are in conversation with some of them, you should disclose that to the next publisher you are writing to, because of course you may have your own reasons for making a parallel submission, and these may have to do with constraints of time, or somebody may be on tenure track and they need to have an agreement in hand. That is, we understand all of those motivations, but it's important to be transparent in this process, because editors will end up investing a lot of time and effort in assessing your proposal, in reading your chapters, and often it goes into peer review as well, which again takes a lot of time. There is monetary investment as well, because we pay all the reviewers that we employ to look at or evaluate any particular manuscript. But it's important that you let your publisher know if there has been previously any conversation, if there is somebody else looking at the work already, or if there is interest from anyone else at all, because then the publisher will know how to advise you. Some publishers, such as ourselves, we don't really encourage parallel submissions. And in most cases, we would not want to take a manuscript to review that is already being looked at by another publisher. So while we understand the constraints and the reasons as to why somebody may need to look at parallel submissions, each publisher will have their own response to it as to whether they want to take it forward or not. Please also focus on the details, and this is very, very important, because the email is the first contact that you are establishing with the publisher, and that first impression does carry a lot of weight. I'm sure all of us have encountered this in our everyday interactions with, whether that's students or colleagues, peers. If an email is very, not very well presented, or if it's just not neat, if it doesn't reflect a basic level of care, it doesn't seem to appeal to us very much. So try to utilize the first opportunity that you have of convincing somebody of your work. Try and present it as neatly as possible. Again, ABCs of writing accurately, precisely, with clarity. Also, some do's and don'ts that we always mention, and this is not aimed or targeted at a particular audience. This happens to us so much on an everyday basis that we find it necessary to mention it in our conversations. That, don't write one email copying it to multiple publishers. Don't also BCC everyone onto the same email. And just be careful in how you are referring to a publisher, because every day I get at least 3 mails where they will say that we want to write to OUP. And then we think that then write to OUP. So things like that happen quite often, but it doesn't really send a very good message. So just be a little careful, pay attention to details, to the detail of writing, whether that's actually the proposal or the first email that you are writing to an editor. Just take a glance once you have written the complete email, just to see that all names are spelled correctly. Very, very basic things like that, they also go a long way. Coming next to what your proposal should have, it should certainly have a meaningful and helpful title. This is becoming more and more important in this day and age, because search engine optimization is a big concern that all publishers have, which is to say that your title should have enough clarity for somebody to understand what the book is about. And so that once somebody is Googling something, your book should come up as one of the top search results. So having a lot of, we understand again, and also as somebody generally more aware or who likes to read, all of our editors feel that, we could have done a lot of innovative things with a book title. But we are really restricted there, because academic publishers especially need to make their work very, very obvious as to what this is about, so that their discoverability improves. So try and focus on having a very clear title, which will tell your readers what the book is about. If there is a time period to be indicated, do that. If there is a particular region to be pointed to, do that as well, please. Then provide a clear description about the book within the book proposal as to what is it exactly that this book is about. So ideally, think of it this way, that anybody reading this proposal should be able to read the first paragraph and understand what the book is about. Don't make them work too hard in decoding what the book is going to be. Please also list all the contributions as well as the limitations of the book. And we usually discourage authors from writing in this language that says that, this is the first book of its kind. Nobody has ever done anything of this. While there may be some truth to it that this is indeed quite novel and it is an intervention in this field, it is just better practice to write in a more humble way that this is going to be important because so and so, and because at the end of the day it is quite difficult to disprove that nothing else exists at all. So there may be things that are tangentially relevant, or there could be other kinds of comparable works, but do try and be as clear as you can about the contribution without overstating any of the claims. Why we also say that you should mention the limitations is because, again, as a better practice, it helps to identify as to at which point this study stops and what pathways there can be for future research related to this field. Coming to the next point, provide a table of contents, summaries of each chapter if possible. And again, we ask this keeping very much in mind that the table of contents can change. It will evolve eventually. Again, when you have been working on a proposal for so long, the proposal that I had got for this book that I mentioned, the proposal from 2017 to the one that has come finally now, they do look very different. The chapterization has changed, the chapter titles have changed. So, all of that does happen, but it's important still when you are writing or submitting a proposal, it is important to give some idea of what is it that you are planning so that the publisher knows that yes, you do have a plan in mind and you are not, it's not a vague proposal. So as of now, you have a very clear, thorough, strong plan for what you want to do with the book. If that changes later, that's a different matter. But you need to be very clear about the plan. Do also very clearly explain what subject categories the book fits into, a list of courses and institutes where you think this book can be helpful. Then try and answer these key questions. Why is another book required in this subject? This will go back to the 2.3 about possible contributions and limitations and what already exists in the field. And this will help you map or keep in mind the top three contributions that you think this book is actually going to have. Is it going to break new ground? Does it employ methodology that hasn't been done a lot in this area? This will again relate to the next point of key features. What is it that this book offers that can't be found just as easily? And again, we say this because we see a lot of readers now say things like, we found this on Google and I learned about, say, the Chola Empire on Google. But is that really, you know, uh, is is that enough? Is it enough to learn about the Cholas just through a Google search? So if your book is about this empire, make it very clear what is it that the book will offer that is going to be more valuable than just an AI summary of what the empire was. Next, provide details of how the project came about, if it is emerging from a thesis, if it is a funded project, or if, for example, if it is an ICSSR project or similar. This clarity is necessary. It's good to be transparent. Also provide details of planned elements of maps, images, tables, and so on, so the publisher can guide you as to what is possible, what is not. Again, this doesn't have to be cast in stone. This can, of course, change, but it's good to have some idea of what is it that you are planning. And finally, do end the proposal by answering this question as to why are you best placed to be writing this book? There may be a lot of books in this field, but what is it that qualifies you or prepares you especially to be the scholarly voice in this subject? Lastly, why do you want to publish with this specific publisher? So your answer can be that you have heard about the editor and you want to work with a particular editor at this publisher's publishing house, or it can be the series that they are working on, and you think that your book is going to be a good fit into that. It can be a more general answer of the sort that this publisher right now is the market leader in South Asia studies, and you think your book is going to have a contribution there. So don't overthink the answer to this. It's just something to show your awareness of the publisher and for us to know that, okay, this person is aware of what is it that we publish and their work aligns well to ours. This goes back to the one of the earlier slides that we had looked at where we advise authors on how to choose a publisher. So if you are writing a very scholarly monograph and that is only that is going to have a good market primarily through libraries, or say it's going to appeal to students, but if you want to publish it with say HarperCollins, perhaps that is not the best match. Or if somebody is writing say a book of there is an annotated version going to be of a new set of poetry that hasn't been published before, or it's a say a English translation of some Tamil poetry from 15th century, and you send it to the press, it is likely that we will not go ahead with it just because it doesn't suit the publishing program. So going back here once again, why do you want to publish with a specific publisher is to guide you very well that you are aware of which publisher offers what, and to also decrease your the probability of your proposal getting a desk reject. A desk reject is when the editor looks at the proposal and says that this is not for me. That can be for several reasons, and it is most often it is not a commentary. It's not it's not ad hominem at all. It is just that the work is not suitable for the publisher to whom you have written. So do please undertake your research, find the best possible publisher for your work. Now, coming to the most important segment of this conversation, for which the title reflects, uh, reflecting the title of this talk, thesis to monograph. The first question I think that all of us need to answer is that does my thesis have to become a book? And I know this is not a very easy or very comfortable question to ask ourselves, but it is an important one. Increasingly, also, we see that there is a huge rush to publish a thesis. I saw in some of the answers that you had written when you were registering for this workshop is that somebody wrote that I have had enough distance, and that is something that publishers appreciate a lot. There has to be some sort of distance between the thesis and the book that it is going to potentially become. Why we say this is because a thesis is written very clearly for one particular committee. A thesis has to serve a purpose. At the end of it is a dissertation. At the end of it is a PhD that's going to be awarded. Of course, that's a whole different journey. But does the thesis really have to become a book in its current shape? Possibly not. Not all theses need to become a monograph. There are going to be important points or takeaways from a thesis that could perhaps go into a book. But please don't rush to think that the thesis needs to be published right now as a book. So do take your time. And again, I am cognizant of the problems of the job market, of academia, particularly that most often we don't have the luxury of time. But wherever we can, if we can utilize the time to publish more journal articles and return to thinking about the book 3 years after the PhD or 5 years after the PhD, perhaps that is a better approach. This time is also required to let your own thoughts mature, to reflect how the market and leadership around your subject and field has changed. It will also help you have a more clear answer for yourself as to whether this thesis really needs to become a book. There are some theses that are very, very focused, quite narrow in their scope because they need to be. If somebody is looking at a very narrow field, they can't possibly change their field, which is all fine. But perhaps it doesn't have to be published exactly as it is as a book because you know that it is not really going to have that sort of a market. So, a couple of things can be done in that case. One is that you take the core of your argument that has been presented in the thesis and rework the book around that. So your argument stays the same, but perhaps the scope expands a bit. So instead of looking at, say, one town in West Bengal, you are looking at the state as a whole to make a larger point. For example, if you are looking at the left rule and the consequences on the Muslim community in Bengal, perhaps don't keep it limited to just one village or one district. You could expand the scope. It could perhaps also be in conversation with left rule in any other state of India. What has happened there? Does it say something about the growth trajectory of the country itself? Does it reflect any change in culture and society and politics? So there are ways of expanding the theme of a thesis to become a book. Okay. Coming now to the more technical aspect of it, how does a thesis actually become a book? Now, there are some very, very basic cosmetic revisions that can be undertaken, which we encourage very much before it is submitted for review. Is that remove subsection headings, remove titles of introduction and conclusion from each chapter. These are things that make a thesis look very thesisy. So a peer reviewer looks at it and immediately says that this is a thesis. This is very clearly a PhD, and it seems that the author hasn't done much work, which is why even though cosmetic revisions are very basic and really quite minor compared to the major structural revisions that will be recommended, we still emphasize that hugely because, again, that sets a first impression for peer reviewers. When your manuscript goes to peer reviewers, we would want their expert commentary on the content itself, on the content of your book, on how well the argument holds up, what is the framework you have employed, does it really justify the argument or not. We would want their expertise to be reflected in conversations of that sort. We would not want them to dismiss the work based just on what it appears to be like. So these are very, very minor things, but they do go a long way. And this is something that we see again. Most of the submissions that we get, even when 5 years have passed after the PhD and somebody is submitting it, it looks exactly like the thesis, the way it was submitted. So some basic changes are often required, encouraged. Coming next to structural revisions, again, think of what is it that you want to say, who is it you want to say to, how has the field changed, evolved, expanded in the last few years when you have finished your thesis and now that you are coming to writing a book. Are there current contemporary debates, conversations, discourses that you need to keep in mind that need to be integrated into the book in some way? Do you think it's possible for you to go back to the field and do some more research to keep it more updated? If not, is there any secondary material that you could look at, refer to? Is there anything, it's also possible that the same fieldwork data that you have collected, say 5 years ago, you are reading it differently, or you are coming up with different interpretations of the same data. That these are some ways in which your thesis will be different from your book eventually. Also, always remember that with a thesis, we are very, very aware of who is it that we are writing for. We know who the examiner is. We know who the panel is going to be. So often, we see that there is lists and lists of references, citations that don't really have enough to do with the work itself. And there are times when the editors, we just joke amongst ourselves that we can almost guess who the committee was, from the citations alone. So remember that with a book, there isn't a PhD at the end of it. There isn't, the stakes are very different. So it's a nameless audience. It's a large general audience that you are writing for. You don't have to don't feel burdened that you have to cite somebody or that this sort of literature review has to be done. Think of what is going to be most beneficial for your audience. If you were referring to a book of this kind, what is the information that you would need? What needs to be updated? What needs to be brought into conversation? Are there ideas within the work that you yourself can challenge now? How would you read it differently? How would you present it differently? So think of a wider audience. Do not restrict yourself to pleasing a particular audience that you may have encountered before. Now, the most important part of the monograph, which is going to be the introduction. Again, we are all very, very painfully familiar, I think, with growing deficiency in attention span. All of us suffer from it, I think. And there are a number of scholars we have heard from that who say that, they will read the introduction to a book because nobody has the time or the patience or the attention to read a book cover to cover. Of course, there are people still reading, but this is also very true that the introduction is the book that is the part that the book hinges on, and is most often the only part that a large audience is going to be reading, a large part of the audience. This again is not something that we only experience and gather just by talking with people. There are matrices that we can track. So on Cambridge Core, which is the digital repository of the press, we can actually see the number of downloads, number of times that a particular part of the book has been accessed. And we do see that there is a clear demarcation in the numbers between the number of downloads of an introduction vis-a-vis any other part or the complete book itself. So the introduction is the gateway to the rest of the book. All the key takeaways are going to be in the introduction. And this is a basic list. I'm sure there can be more additions to this. But one thing that an introduction should not do is overcome it. Please do not make a lot of claims that you know are not going to be followed through or carried through in the rest of the book. If you think there are large arguments that you are making that will for sure be realized, then write those. But do not make a lot of very, very big claims that possibly don't have enough scope within the book to be realized. Also, one tip from editors, if you will, is that don't begin your revisions from your thesis to your monograph, or even if you're writing a new book, don't begin by writing the introduction. Come to the introduction at the very end, because again, the entire book hinges on the introduction, while the introduction hinges on what is happening in the chapters. So if you write the introduction first and then you see that the chapters are going in a very different direction, you will need to come back and redo everything. And it's always helpful to have a larger overview of what has happened in the rest of the book, so as to, uh, to be very clear in the introduction as to how you will introduce the book itself. Which brings me to the second point, that the introduction has to introduce the book also, not only the field. So it's not enough to, or it's not necessary for you to go into, say, 4 pages of discussion about what else exists, what has happened. All of that is important, but equally important is for you to introduce the book to the reader also. What is this book? What does it do? What are the primary arguments, aim, scope of this manuscript? Why? What are the primary questions they are answering? Are there some limitations that the book is not, the book has questions that it is possibly not going to answer because it doesn't fall within the scope of it? So you will see that the introduction eventually becomes a more expanded, detailed version of the proposal itself. These are going to be the primary points that you will need to cover in the introduction. Again, coming to the limitations of the premise and so on, think of some questions that you would expect a book like this to answer. Then try and assess, does your book actually answer these questions? If it does, well and good. If it does not, then try and explain why not. Because, see, it's not possible for one book to do everything, and it shouldn't have to. However, what it can do or should be doing is explaining to the reader in the introduction itself as to exactly what its point is, what has it set out to do, what are its goals for itself, and what is it that it doesn't promise to do and will therefore not be looking at. It's best to be honest and transparent with the reader so that they don't feel misguided at any step, that there was a lot of promise, or it said that it will do this and this and then it didn't. So some points here. Yamini, how much time would you say I have?
You can go ahead. It's not, I mean, we are not short on time. Also, because the larger, I mean, out of 57, 33 only have shown up. So we have time. So you don't need to curtail yourself.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we move on to the next point, talking about the life cycle of bookmaking. What is it? How much time does it take? What happens? What follows? And I'll also, after this talk, I'll share a write up, a summary of this, the process itself with Yamini, so she can circulate it ahead with all of you if you need to refer to it. I'll also circulate a book proposal form of the press. Again, it's not that because we are sending it, you have to fill it in and send it back to us. But feel free to use it as a template for what is the information that you need to provide to publishers. So once you submit a book proposal, the editors at a publishing house will discuss it amongst themselves at their regular editorial meetings as to how well this proposal fits into their publishing program. Does it or does it not at all? For example, if somebody is submitting a philosophy proposal to us, we are going to tell them to either consider another publisher, or we will send it to our colleagues in the UK office, because the India publishing program does not publish in philosophy. Likewise, if you send a proposal on psychology or literature, those are likely not going to be things that the South Asia office will look at. We will either tell you that it doesn't fit into the press's overall program, or if it is relevant, we will send it to another editor based in another office, but we ourselves will not be looking at it. Again, which brings me, again, it's a repetition of something that I had said earlier as well, is that do your research, look at which editor works on what is the focus of the list. For the press, I can confidently say that you will find all this information online. So if you search for Cambridge University press editors, it will show you a page. It is going to be divided according to subject, so you will know who are the editors working in politics, who are the editors working in history. Likewise, you can look at regions also, who are the editors based in South Asia working on South Asia studies specifically. So all this information is available, and we will encourage authors to do their research. So coming back to this point, if it is a if it is a proposal that appeals to the publishing program that seems very well suited, that is when we will request the manuscript for review. Now, there is a small change that has happened here of late that we are trying to implement. Is earlier we were quite insistent on having the complete manuscript for peer review. Now, with constraints of time, we see that even when we are sending in a complete manuscript for review, readers do not really have the full time to invest in reading the complete thing, which is why we prefer now to send in the proposal and half of the manuscript. Unless the reader states otherwise that they will be looking at the complete manuscript and they are okay to spend that time, we are sending in half of it. So your editor will advise you on this. Uh, Having said that, however, there are going to be some subjects where it is necessary that a complete manuscript is reviewed. So again, keep in conversation with your editor. Do not hesitate to ask questions. So do not think that am I asking too much? Am I asking for many clarifications? I'm not certain what is happening, and am I annoying the editor? You are not. It is very literally our job to help you, to handle you through these processes. So whenever you have a question as to what is happening, what is expected, what next, just ask us. Okay. So once, let's say, half the manuscript or the complete work has gone into peer review, it takes about 3 to 4 months for reviews to come back in. This is only getting worse since the pandemic. We have seen the timelines increase like anything. There have been manuscripts that I have managed to get reviews of within 4 to 6 weeks, but now there are two chapters and the proposal that have taken more than 8 to 10 weeks in peer review. So again, keep asking your editor as to what the progress is. Will they let you know when they have received one review? In all likelihood, they will not be able to share one review with you on its own. We require a minimum of 2 to 3 reviews for each proposal that we are working on. So it's not likely that they will send you that standalone review that they may have received. But what they can do is update you as to what's happening, what is the review process, what does it look like now, have they got enough reviewers, do they need you to make any suggestions as to who could be potential reviewers in this field, and so on. So, all this to say that don't shy away from asking questions of your editors. Peer review, once that is done, and let's say that the reviews are positive, they recommend publication, but they are also making suggestions for your consideration. That is when your editor will discuss the reviews with you and request you to respond. This at this stage, they are not asking you to rewrite the proposal or rewrite any of the chapters and give. What they need you to do here is just to read the two reviews and provide your comments in detail to all of the points that have been made in the reviews. Once you have done that satisfactorily, your editor will take it to the process called syndication. Syndication is unique to university presses. For Oxford, I think it's called delegates. For us, it's the syndicate board, which is very senior scholars from the University of Cambridge and very senior press officials who together make this board called the syndicate board, who approve every proposal that each editor is working on. So no book is published without syndication, because without syndication there is no contract, and without contract there is of course no book. So syndication is a mandatory process for academic university press publishing. Once a book is syndicated, that is when your editor will write to you saying that it has been syndicated and we can now move to the process of offering a book publishing contract. So that is going to be the agreement that you can, that formally tells you or legally binds the publisher to publish your work. Once you receive the contract, do go through it very, very carefully. And I cannot emphasize this enough, that I know that us in academia take a lot of things very, we don't really pay attention to a lot of things. We take a lot of things at face value, but it's a contract, it's a legal document. It has a number of repercussions. There have been authors who have said that, but I didn't look at it and I just signed it. And we tell them that you can't be signing a contract without reading it. So, because all of us are so much in the habit of, just clicking that box of terms and conditions accepted without reading that tiny font. But a contract is not like that. It is very clear font. It is a long document. Sit with your editor if you have to, if you don't understand any clause. Do read everything that is written in a contract. Do read explanations if your editor has put them, marked them as comments in the contract itself, so that you know your rights, you know what you are entitled to, so that you are aware of what the publisher is responsible for, what to do in cases of, if there is a disagreement somewhere down the line. What is it that the publisher will owe you? What is it that you are required to do? All of this is very, very important. Again, I really cannot overemphasize this point. Please read a contract. Please do not sign without reading. Please take it very seriously, whatever clauses are put in a contract, and clarify any and every doubt that you have, and clarify it with your editor. You may, of course, want to discuss it with your peers, that what did your contract look like? Does it have this or that? But the person best placed to answer your queries about the contract will still be the editor, because they will be representing both you and the press. It is in their best interest to get you to sign a contract, and they are supposed to have the best outcome for both parties. So please do ask questions. Please read things very, very carefully. Once a contract is negotiated and signed, that is when you will tell us as to how long you need to prepare the final manuscript. Again, there is a small point here, which is that a manuscript may go in for peer review again if required. Some manuscripts do, some don't. It depends on what the review process was like, what the comments were like, what if there were major revisions suggested. So things of that sort. Again, your editor will advise you. They will let you know during the signing of the contract as to whether it is expected to go back into review or not. Once the manuscript has been completely submitted in with all its elements, the the editor will conduct some pre-production checks, which is to say that are the chapters in order? Are they formatted in the correct way? Are there images, permissions, citations? Is everything in the clear? Does everything look good to go? If so, they will hand over to production. If not, they will come back to you requesting you to check everything. Again, this is a huge point, and this is something that we struggle with a lot, because most academics don't read things very carefully. So the number of guidelines that we will send that, please prepare your manuscript according to this, in most cases, they will not look at it. And which creates a lot of time lag later on because we need it to be in a particular format. Especially if your manuscript has images, tables, graphs, illustrations, anything of the sort, it becomes double the work, and that work is best done beforehand. So ensure that you are providing it in the best possible resolution, that it is not pixelating when zoomed in on, that you have permissions. Again, will come to permissions in more detail, but ensure that you have permissions, that you have listed captions for each image, you have placed it correctly within each chapter wherever it is supposed to go, you have explained the callouts within the text itself that refer to image 1.1 or figure 3.4 and so on. Again, all of this to say that once your editor sends you guidelines on how to prepare a manuscript, please do follow those guidelines. They are really quite crucial, especially again, if they have an illustrative material. Again, especially because now the EU accessibility guidelines have been enforced. So for the press, at least any book that has images needs to also have alt text and long descriptions, so that a screen reader is able to give the best outcome to a differently abled person who's using the screen reader to read one of our books. So there are going to be a number of these things. Again, you will not be left alone to handle all of this. Again, your editor is there. They'll provide all guidelines. They're here to answer any questions. Just please refer to the guidelines and ask those correct questions. Once all of this is sorted and it is handed over to production, that is when the process bifurcates across two sets of people. One is who will be copy editing the work, raising queries for you. They will create the proofs. There will be proofreading, indexing, and so on. The other side, the other group of people will be working parallelly on writing or finalizing the blurb for your book, advising you on endorsements, releasing information online, cataloging, book cover, and so on. Um, Once all of this is in place, all of it has been done, that is when the book is going to be published. Now, going back to 2 points here, one that had appeared on the first slide was that does your book need to be part of a series? No, it is not mandatory for any book to be part of a series at a publishing house. However, sometimes there are books where the author is very certain that this fits into the scope of a series very well. So, in our case, whether that's Global South Asians or South Asia in the social sciences or economic history of Indian states or Muslim South Asia, South Asian intellectual history, if you think your book fits very well into one of the scope of one of these series, of course, you could pitch it, but it's not mandatory, and no author should feel burdened to categorically specify that their book fits into one series or not. About 80% of the books that we publish are standalone books, and they do just as well without being part of a series as well. And a series has its own identity, and the merits of publishing within a particular series are many, but it is not something that has to be forced. If it makes for a natural home within a series, it's fine for you to specify. If not, don't worry about it. The second point is about endorsements. Often we have a lot of authors asking that I hadn't thought of endorsements. Do I have to have them? Again, no, it's not mandatory. It is not that you have to have endorsements for a book. In fact, if you don't, that's just less work for you as well as the press. But there isn't any strict guideline that you can or cannot have endorsements. If you choose to have endorsements, that is something that you will have to solicit on your own. But your editor will guide you on a couple of logistical things, and also the choice of endorsers. At the press, we always encourage authors to have a good mix or diversity of people who are commenting on the book. Ideally, there should be gender representation, there should be regional representation as well. For example, say somebody is writing on women and labor in India, and they don't have any women commenting on the book at all. That is just, I think that doesn't make for very good academic practice. Likewise, if somebody not based in India. There is no scholar at all from India commenting on the book. That also reflects a sort of distance from what the book is aiming to do and what it actually is practicing. Perhaps that is not the best academic, ethics, but try and have this sort of good mix of scholars. Okay, so these 2 points are done. I'll just go back once again to the point about guidelines. Please read them carefully as you will read the contract. Ask questions. Please pay attention to those details because they are really, really quite crucial. Okay. I'll take a moment here to talk about peer review because again we get this question, that is peer review really important? Can't we skip this step? It's going to take a long time. If you would want to have your work published without peer review, perhaps academic publishing is not going to be the best avenue for your work then, and you should consult another publisher that offers a different sort of timeline or a different sort of publishing process. But if you want your work to be rigorously reviewed, that sort of academic vetting has been done, then of course an academic publisher will insist on peer review. Not just insist, it is an unskippable part of the process. So anything that comes to us that is going to eventually be published has to go through peer review, and that is mandatory. That's a non-negotiable. Because a lot of you said that you have some experience of publishing before, I'm sure you will have encountered peer review, especially for journals. I know it takes a longer time. There are several rounds that may or may not apply to book publishing also, depending on what the first round of reviews were like, how much of what portion of the manuscript was reviewed, and so on. The three most obvious outcomes are: one is that it's accepted without revisions. As you can possibly imagine, it sounds too good to be true. So mostly it is. It's very rare that something is accepted exactly as it is without revisions. Most often there are some minor revisions or some considerations for the author to look into. Second is where revisions are suggested, which would be again minor revisions or they could be major. If they are minor, they are likely to do with language editing or referring to further literature, revisiting some arguments, and so on. Major revisions would be structural issues that call for a significant reorganization of the text. So there can be a major overhaul required. They may advise you to conduct more fieldwork, cite more data, engage with more literature. There can be new angles introduced by the reviewers to this work that it can make for a stronger argument if it is approached in this way or that, or this scope is introduced. Or they may suggest that you rework the entire work within the existing analysis of data or evidence. So, in case of major revisions, again, talk to your editor. What is the best way? What is it that they would suggest? If you disagree anywhere, talk to them, explain your disagreements, or say that. Sorry, yeah. Say, explain why you disagree, why you think something, a suggestion made is beyond the scope of the work. The third outcome could be that it is declined based on peer review, because if the reviews say that there is a huge there is a major flaw here, or the framework doesn't hold up at all, or these arguments do not fall well, they are not following a clear rationale or structure, in that case a manuscript is likely to be declined. But I must also say that it is quite rare for a manuscript to be declined at COP after peer review, because usually editors are quite certain of what is it that they want to take to peer review. So, which is why the internal review time is also it's invested very well. It's invested in thorough reading of chapters, coming back with suggestions, asking the author to rework certain things, and so on. So while the press editors can't really advise you on the content itself because we are not subject specialists, but from the editor's perspective, there will be a number of things that they will request you to change. So please do take all of those suggestions very seriously. If you think that something you don't agree with, feel free to tell your editor as to why or why not you will be incorporating some of them. This again carries on into the peer review process. Explain your disagreements. It may so happen, just to cite a few examples of what the peer reviews are usually like. Somebody may say that, this argument is not made at all. But you may think that, but I have made this argument exactly this in chapter 2. What may have happened there is perhaps your argument is submerged under the layer of several other things. And because an author is very close to their research subject and they have been doing this for the longest time, we tend to take a lot of things for granted that, I have mentioned this, so naturally this is the outcome that somebody will be thinking of. But that happens because we are too closely aligned to this sort of work. And it may need more exposition for another person to look at it and respond to. So do consider all of this. Do not write a defensive response to the reviews when your editor shares it with them. Please keep in mind that the peer review process is rigorous, it takes time, it takes effort. But the aim is shared by all three parties, that is, the publisher, and the peer reviewer, is to help the work become the best possible version of itself. Okay. Now I'll come to last 2 points. One is about what is plagiarism, and this again, please don't think that it's a targeted comment or it's a targeted, subject that we are bringing here. But this is something that we speak at all workshops that any of the editors conduct, is because we have also seen that within India, a lot of scholars have a very different idea of what plagiarism means. So, plagiarism, very simply, is using another person's ideas or work or presenting it as our own. I have been at workshops where I've had questions from the audience where they are saying that how much percentage of plagiarism is allowed. Plagiarism cannot be allowed. It's unethical, it's illegal. So it's not something that can be allowed, which is what points us to this idea that, the what we understand by plagiarism is very different from what we are taught to understand. This means that anything that has not emerged from your own desk should be cited. It should not be presented as your own work. This extends to anything. And this brings me to another important point here where I was talking about Google and images and citations and so on. A lot of times there are images where that have been used and the source is cited as Google or Wikimedia. Now, it has taken us a lot of time to explain to authors that, something on Google can't be used without permission. But they will say this is the public domain. So again, public domain doesn't mean anything that is, because everything is available on Google, but that doesn't mean it's available for us to use freely in a commercial capacity. So something that can be used, say in a thesis, can't be used in a published book because a published book is a commercial property. And we need permissions to use everything. So just because we find something free of cost on Google doesn't mean that it allows us or it gives us the right to reproduce it exactly in a commercial work. So public domain doesn't mean that, and this is very common. Really, this is a thing that we see again every day. Plagiarism and public domain. These are two terms that are used very easily by scholars, but please remember that they don't give us the right to, do whatever with information available online. What is self-plagiarism? Self-plagiarism is where somebody is citing, or not exactly citing, but using or recycling a lot of their own work previously published and presenting it as a new book. So if you say that it is a collection of essays previously published, it is based on this sort of writing you have done before, that is fine. But presenting it as new material or calling it a new book can be on the fence or can be on the boundary of what constitutes self plagiarism. So please be careful about all of this. How does one avoid plagiarism? The rule of thumb is that if you are unsure, just lean towards citing. So if you are not certain where, uh, how much of a particular work you have taken and which part needs to be cited, just be in the clear, cite everything. If you are quoting a text, cite it as a block quote. If you have taken a text, image, illustration, map, anything from anywhere, cite it in full. And this is quite a gray area. It can be, depending on, somebody could say that I have taken this image from Wikimedia and it says that there are it's in the public domain again and it can be used. Sometimes when we have gone in and after some deep diving, we will discover that it says it is in the public domain but cannot be used commercially, which means that, of course, it can't be put in the book. So either the author has to replace the image or drop it entirely. For maps, also, it can be quite a gray area, but please have the patience. Please have this conversation with your editor also. If required, it could go into several rounds, but please keep having this conversation so that both parties can prove it without a doubt that yes, it is available for use and that we are not violating copyright anywhere. Copyright is not an easy subject, and it possibly requires a session entirely on its own, but it's not that there is one general rule for all things that are within or outside of copyright, because it depends on areas, it depends on when it was published, where it was originally commissioned. So there are all sorts of nitty-gritties of those, but do invest in the research time in finding out what the sources are, discuss them with your editor, take their advice if required, and yeah, that is about it on plagiarism, public domain, copyright. And yeah, we will move on to some questions and also go back to the first slide just so I can remember what are the other FAQs that we had thought of. Yamini, over to you now if you would want to.
Yeah. Whoever wants to ask a question, you can either type it in the chat box or raise your hand, and then I'll call out your name and you can ask the question. Thank you so much, Anwesha, for this. It was very, very helpful. I mean, it was really very useful.
Thank you.
So you can raise your hand or you can type it in the chat box and we'll take it one after the other. Okay. Okay. I want to know more about self-plagiarism. Dr. Sayanthani Sur is asking.
Okay. So self-plagiarism is, I'll cite an example. Several years ago, we heard from this one person who said that you have published a book that is entirely plagiarized. So of course, that was a red flag for us because we wouldn't want to do that, and we have very strict checks in place to ascertain whether something has contains plagiarized material or not. And then again, we had to do a lot of conversations with this person who was alleging another person of self plagiarizing. And then we recognized that what had happened was this person had not fully disclosed that all of this material has appeared in different places and they had presented it as entirely new research. So don't do that. And I know that a lot of academic scholars, of course, they need to publish their work in research journals first. It is published in journals, the same work in some format appears in a thesis or in a monograph. That is all right, but you need to disclose it. So say chapter 2 of your book is based on a journal article that was published 3 years ago. You need to put in a footnote within that chapter on the opening page of the chapter and say that this is a reworked version of this, and permissions have been cleared with the publisher. So whether that's the journal or the editor of a book, they will have cleared permission for you to use. In most cases, you are of course free to you would be the copyright owner and you would be free to use your own material. But the difference here is of transparency. So how much information you are sharing with your audience, that this appears in a different format somewhere, this has appeared before, and that you are not claiming that this book is entirely new. So does that answer your question?
One more, associated, connected question is, if we have published papers in a journal, what kind of permissions should I have in place?
You
Like
would
some
need,
chapters.
yes, you would need to write to the journal and ask them what their policy is. Most publishers that I am aware of, there is a website called PLS Clear where you just need to log your request and they will give you an automated answer that yes, this is fine for you to go ahead and include in your forthcoming book with, say, CUP. If there is any deviation from this, the editor will ideally let you know as to if there is something else you need to know, because in most cases you would be the copyright owner, so you are free to utilize or recycle that work in a forthcoming publication, but you need to cite and credit the source appropriately. So you need to mention that it was published in this journal at this time and that this is a reworked version.
Yeah, one more question before I call Satya to speak is there extra fees for open access and which needs to be borne by the authors, the cost to be borne by the authors? The same question for ebooks. How does one ensure this is part of the conversation from the beginning?
Okay. So, for more generically, you should ask your editor if there is scope for open access. If so, what are the avenues? How much is the fee? What does it cover exactly? And whether they do digital offerings or not. For Cambridge University Press, uh, both are done. We do have a scope for publishing open access, and everything that we publish is automatically available as an ebook. So there isn't a separate request that you need to raise with us for your book to be published open access, or sorry, for your book to be published as an ebook. You could check this on our repository on Cambridge Core. Anything that we have ever published is a counterpart of that as a digital format is available. Yamining's book also, it's published as a hardback in India, but globally it has a paperback and a hardback. And everywhere there is an ebook available that can be just purchased. There's a Kindle version, there is an ebook, institutional login, download, all of those options are available. The open access fee for books is £10,500. Plus, there is a VAT depending on which region the request emerges from. But there are a lot of funding bodies that one can use to for this grant to be made available, because I can't quite imagine that scholars in Southeast or anywhere really will have £10,500 just ready on their own to give to a publisher to publish their work open access.
Please give more information on copy editing.
Okay. For copy editing, the press doesn't go into a detailed, minute level copy editing where it works on language overhaul. The manuscript is expected to have been through all of that. So if you think that you need language improvement or you would like to employ a developmental editor on your own, that is something you are free to do. But the press undertakes copy editing for basic language edits to fix grammatical or syntactical errors, to point out if there is a missing citation or a reference cross check is not showing the correct result, things of that kind. If they are making any changes anywhere in the manuscript, they will flag it as a query for the author. So the copy edited chapters will come to you. You could look at all the queries that have been raised. Once you have responded to all of them, that is when the press editors, the copy editors will incorporate them into the manuscript and the first proofs will be generated. At this stage, please remember that you can't make any more changes. So the version that you submit to the press is final. What you can change during copy editing and in the proof stages, if there is a serious error that you spot somewhere, if there is a factual mistake, things like that, but you can't revise or rewrite any part of the manuscript.
Satya, you can unmute yourself and ask question. After that, we'll go back to chat questions.
Okay, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the organizers and resource person for this enlightened and most important topic. I have three very small questions. Number one is I'm working in history, so there are some books which might be published in 1870. I have I want to take one picture from the 1870 books, which is a contemporary to my period, but now I don't know who is holding the ownership of this. If I want to use that particular picture, whom I have to approach for the permission? That is one question. The second question is, for example, the map of the Madras presidency. So if I am recreating this map of the Madras presidency, is it ethical or I have the model. I will follow any model, but I'll recreate in a color and this thing. Am I allowed to do that, or is it ethical violations, or should I need to give some citation for this? That is the second one, and the final one is how do one should navigate with the ideology of a particular journal. For example, so I'm working on famine, so it's a very sensitive topics, right? So when it comes to the Cambridge University Press, like how do I navigate with the ideology of particular publishers? Thank you.
So for the first question, for this image, I think you will need to look at if the magazine or the journal, anything is available somewhere in the archives, and if you could show that copyright has lapsed for it, you will need to look up the copyright laws. From what I know, for India, it is 100 years. So from the time of publication, and we don't, India doesn't really renew copyright. So it is out of copyright after the initial first years have lapsed. It could depend on what the object is that you are trying to reproduce. If it is a painting, for example, you will need to check that the painter, the copyright lapses after 100 years of the death of the painter, for example. In that case, it doesn't depend only on when the thing was published, it depends on the creator. So copyright lapses after 100 years of the demise of the creator. And there are all these kinds of, it's a lot of details there. And this is some bit of research that will be required on your part, or you could ask your publisher to help you with it. And for your second query, maps can be recreated. Again, depending on the source, you will absolutely need to cite it that you have recreated it depending on some. Yamini, perhaps we could cite that example. I don't recall exactly what
Yes,
had
yes.
happened.
I was exactly
You know that,
thinking that these
yes,
were the
we had a
challenges I was facing.
yeah, we had a long discussion and several back and forth on that
Yes,
as to
yes,
what is to be done.
yes.
Yeah. But it
Yeah.
has to be cited for certain. And whatever image illustration maps you are using, save the links to all of them, because we will need to go back and verify all of it, that it is correct, that the legal language is correct, that the citation language we are using is in sync with what is expected. So
Yes,
all of
I'll
that,
just
yeah.
add to what Anwesha has said. For instance, there are lots of like 1870, maybe a gazette or whatever. It's been scanned and it's available. There are many digital archives that are available. So while they're available on public domain, as Anwesha rightly pointed out, I mean, literally, I had exactly the same question because I was also writing a history, same kind of material. So the things which we did was one is the copyright thing, 100 years, which is mentioned. But even after that, there are also some specific clauses of who has scanned the material and who is it available with right now. So wherever you're getting that material from, you can write to those people. For example, there is Hathi Trust. It has a lot of these. I mean, this kind of material, gazettes or 1870 material which is available. They have a team who responds to it. So I had written to them, and they had gotten back saying what can be used, what can't be used. So each of these digital archives, they have a team who responds to it, which can be a proof of it can be usable. Then there's also some maps which are available on, let's say, Wikimedia maps, which says, as Anvesha mentioned, that it says that it's available for open access. But we don't know if it is really, because we need to check. So what once you keep on clicking the links where it takes you to where exactly is it coming from. Then, for example, one was from Indiana University, some library or archive, which they had given for open access. So I wrote to the library people asking, I want to use them for my book. Can it be used? And they'll give you a clear response, which can again be filed as a proof that it can be used. And I also got some maps created the same way as you're mentioning. So, but you need to get permission for reusing those maps. For instance, a couple of maps I'd used from Telangana State Archives. So I'd requested permission from the archivist to use these two maps, while I'm not exactly using the same maps because the photographs are not really of great quality, etc. And the map is also not in great condition. But because I had gotten it recreated, however, I got a permission letter saying that it can be used in a book. then you can get it recreated with whoever, but also you need to mention how was it recreated, like what is the software which is being used, etc. Also, for example, for contemporary maps, if you're using, let's say, today's maps to map something out, there are specific softwares which we use to create it. So, and you will have to disclose, each of those softwares also have a copyright policy which is available on their website. They'll either say that you'll have to disclose it in particular ways, or they'll say, you can't use it. Largely, you can use it because if it's open access, they'll say you can use it. But they have a line of credit, how to credit them, that you have to incorporate in the maps.
Yeah, thank you. And one more question, final question.
Yes, yes. I think all of these decisions, mostly for academic works, journals, and books, depend on peer review. I don't think that anybody can take a decision based on an ideology or an ideological agreement or disagreement, because peer review is a very foolproof way, in the sense that, because that there is a checks and balance in place. I would suggest that you send it to a journal, and you will, of course, have followed what the journal is doing, what is the kind of discourse that it has been responding to. Look at the past few issues or the most latest issues as to what is it that is being published. Do you think that your article is going to be in conversation with them? Do you think your article challenges them in any way? That could also be an interesting avenue for the journal to then respond to, by publishing this sort of back and forth between scholars. But I really don't think that any journal will decline publishing something based on an ideological agreement or disagreement.
Yes, great. Thank you so much for both of you.
Yeah, Himabindu?
Yeah, hi. Yamini, this is in continuation with what we've also spoken about on how to use images from periodicals. We've spoken about Golconda Patrika. So what are the protocols that we need to follow in terms of using images of historical newspapers if they are not yet 100 years old?
Anwesha, would you want to answer that?
Yes, so this also happens quite often, where scholars will click photos and use. That is not really encouraged, and it also doesn't come under fair use policy. But this is also very case to case. I think there have been a couple of occasions where somebody has been able to use it. So there was this one book where they were referring to pamphlets created by political parties, and then we had quite a hard time ascertaining as to who does the copyright remain with. Is it the artist or is it the party, and how do we use it? And they said that we are going to take photos of the pamphlets instead of using the pamphlet itself, and it was a whole difficult thing. But a lot of this copyright question is actually case to case. So when you are faced with something of that sort, I won't really advise that do this or don't do this. If you are taking an image from somewhere, let your publisher know and ask them if they think that this is going to be allowed. For screen grabs, I know that often screen grabs are put in case especially of very old films where somebody is playing a DVD and they have done a screen grab and put that in the book. That has, from what I have seen, been acceptable. Somehow this exact same thing doesn't really always translate into applying for images as well. But yeah, I think when that happens, just let your editor know or ask them, provide the exact sources, the exact images, and ask what is the best way.
Uh,
Thank
one
you.
one thing which we did also was, basically, if who has the collection, and for instance, not with case of Golconda Patrika because nobody really had it, it was there everywhere, but in some cases an archive has it, so archive becomes holder of it, so you could ask the archive. Either they tell you that we don't have the copyright, I mean, it's at your discretion, or sometimes they also know the, like, descendants of those owners, etc., and they give a clearance. That happened with me in case of one image, one or two images, which was, again, some magazines, and the person who was holding it got in touch with the next generation of people, and they said, they're free to use. So that's one. Or in case of some magazines where there is no possible way to trace that kind of a thing, then again you look at the copyright and see. It's also like you have proved that there is nobody who can give you a clearance. So that's also one way, basically, to attempt all ways of clearing it. That's also something which we have done. Yeah. A couple of more questions on the chat. Is it advised to have your manuscript fully written before sending in the book proposal? Can it be a work in progress?
Yeah, it can absolutely be a work in progress. You don't have to have a manuscript fully ready. You could write your proposal, be very clear about what you want the book to be doing, and then you can begin approaching publishers. They can advise you on what they want to do next.
Yeah. The next question, I have already published one journal article based on my PhD, and then many people suggested to me to make some more articles for journals as it gets more consideration in academics. If I do so, will I be able to compile all these and make a book later? If not, what would be a better option?
Some publishers will accept it as a book, some will not want to. So I know that CUP will not want to publish something that is already available in bits and pieces as journal articles. And I do recognize the conundrum here that you are required to publish in journals, but what do you do when all the material is exhausted and published and available? So the reason why we don't encourage a lot of previously published material, the threshold for us is 20%, is because then it becomes hard to sell to libraries, because if it's available already and most libraries subscribe to these journals and so on and their students have access to it, so it becomes hard to convince them of why is it that somebody should be buying a book based on the same material. So you need to either present it in a different way or go with a publisher that is happy to accept it in the form that you are presenting in. So if you put a collection of 5 journal articles and present it as a book, acknowledging, of course, that all of that has been published previously, if they are all right to accept it, that's fine. But say if you are pitching to a press like ours, then the editors will ask you for a revised work. They will say that you can take some arguments, but the chapters themselves need to be rewritten thoroughly so that they don't exactly resemble or very closely resemble what has been published before. So your argument can stay the same, but how you make that argument and what you depend on to reach there, to arrive that point, has to be different.
Next question, please talk about AI generated picture and copyright.
We don't allow AI generated material at all. Like CUP doesn't.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anyone? Please raise your hand or ask in the chat. Okay. If we don't have any questions, should we close? And anything okay, nothing else, I think. Thank you so much, Anwesha. This was really very, very helpful.
Thank
Even
you.
after having gone through the whole thing, I still found it very, very helpful.
Okay, so we'll, if there are any questions or if you want to talk to one of the editors at the press, please feel free to write to us and we'll get back as soon as we can.
Thanks a lot. We're very grateful for this wonderful session,
Thank
Anwesha.
you. Thank you for
Yeah.
helping us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Anwesha, just wanted to ask you if somebody wants to, I think you mentioned about a book proposal format. Do they write to you to for that
Yes,
format?
yes. I'll send all that material to Yamini, the proposal and the
Sure.
summary of the publishing process. So
Yeah.
you could circulate it to everyone. Whoever wants
Sure.
to send in a proposal, they can.
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you so
you. Thanks a lot, everyone.
much. Bye.